I'm Oliver. I'm with the Swiss Supercomputing Center, associated with ETH Zurich, and I would like to talk to you about knowledge graphs. So I found when I checked the schedule that my talk is directly in the middle of two rocket science talks with satellites and orbit and whatnot. So I thought, well, my talk will be a little bit the relaxing one. We make things simple and easy, so we're talking about the human brain. Well, the way we started was, it was a project called the Human Brain Project, more than 10 years ago now. And we were basically tasked to do the scientific data management for that one. And one thing that you need to know, and basically the neuro up there is in brackets because I think what I'm telling you now is completely true for any kind of science. But the problem is truly that you have several challenges. So why is scientific data management important? Why can't just every scientist just do whatever they like in their lab and then they're good and they throw away their data? Well, with data, especially scientific data, there comes cost, right? So you have financial cost, right? Experiments might be expensive, but there's also ethical cost, right? Do you really want to slice up that little pure rat for every single experiment, or would you rather like to use the data again for more stuff or for like other studies that you want to execute? And then there's the heterogeneity in the field. Neuroscience is not just neuroscience. There's plenty of different ways how you can do neuroscience. Scientists are sometimes very innovative in building their own devices. They for sure have all their own workflows. They have different study targets. So some of them think about the whole brain, some of them only think about cells, some of them think about how the cell looks like, the other ones like how it functions. So there's plenty of different ways of seeing scientific data. There's also obviously a huge amount of different data formats out there. And last but not least, everyone is using different semantics and terminologies. So I call it A, you call it B. We mean the same, but yeah, we wouldn't know. So if we want to achieve the goal that the data that is produced becomes fair, some of you might have heard that one already. It's an acronym standing for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. And I highlighted the I and R there because findable and accessible, that's easy to do, right? You upload it somewhere, you describe it with a title and some descriptions, and then people can find it. Accessible, yeah, okay, they can click on the download button, you're good. But interoperable, this difficult word, and reusable requires way more. It requires rich context. Because, right, if you just have a table such as this one over here, right, with some cryptic column names, I'm sure, by the way, this is not only science related, I'm sure if you're working for any kind of company using Excel, you have the same data sitting in your company as well. Some cryptic columns, some values, no units, no idea when or where or with what this has been produced. If I'm the scientist up there smiling and passing on my data because I'm a good scientist, I want to share my data with others, well, the reaction you can see, right? It's not just the human receptors, but also the AI receptors that, yeah, well, they could make something up. They could try to figure out what that is, but in theory, they need more context to understand what exactly you're doing. Just a little disclaimer, this data set is great. Follow the link down there. This has metadata, so it just needed to have an example. It's not that this is a bad data set at all. So yeah, we need that metadata. But now the problem comes in. I just said neuroscience is a very broad field. So we need to find some kind of standard how we want to annotate this. Well, it's easy for the generic stuff, right? Title, description, authors, whatnot. But if you go into detail, like if you want to describe something, a data set that is like, so you can really reuse it, that you understand what has been done to the subject, like has the mouse been anesthetized, has the mouse been like in what other condition, has it had a genetic manipulation in there or whatnot. So you need to go very deep. Now, then there's also the question, how do we gather that kind of information? So first of all, what do we really need? And secondly, what can we ask the scientists to provide us? And sometimes scientists, they are not really paid for giving away data. So this is kind of a tricky thing. So we need to reduce the effort for the scientists to do so. So yes, a lot of heterogeneity, a lot of variety, meaning one scheme fits it all does not apply. So you cannot just say, okay, I have now a scheme, you describe your data set in that scheme and we're all happy. You can do that. Some of the repositories do that, but then they're staying at the very generic level. And this is not what we want to do. So what we need is multi-level descriptions and the annotations that continuously evolve. With every experiment that has been executed, there's for sure some particularities that require something that you didn't foresee beforehand, and therefore the thing has to move on. So we need a graph. We just heard before in another talk how great graphs are for relational access management, but graphs can even do more than that. Now, if we want and if we ask people to register data in graphs, that's a tricky thing to do because thinking in graphs is hard. I do that since 10 years and I still struggle sometimes, right? Because the whole connectivity is, well, let's say it like that. If you look at the full graph, you can be overwhelmed. So how do we solve it then? Well, by collaborative knowledge engineering, right? I have a specific domain. I'm an expert in a specific field, and I have no clue about what the cloud native people do, let's say, right? So I can only contribute to metadata stuff, and the cloud native people, the deploy, the DevOps, the whatnot, they do their stuff. So why should I try to figure out all the context that is not in my domain and try to register it if you can do that as well? So the idea is everyone contributes just a little bit they can, and the other ones do the same. And by linking the things together, we're generating knowledge after all. And that's where the knowledge graph comes from. But as said, it's not that easy. So we need tooling. Now, often you see graphs like, okay, I install Neo4j and I'm done. I have an ETL pipeline automatically feeding that one in from a relational database, maybe another one, and then it basically combines things by rules, and that's what it is. We said we need more than that because we're talking to people, and typically not technically very aware people, very well-educated people in that regard. So we need other tools for that to address everyone involved in the knowledge engineering process. MarmotGraph, you see it everywhere. We're very good in advertising. And we also love acronyms. Marmot is on one hand this cute little animal. On the other hand, it stands for Management Applications for Rich Metadata Objects in a Graph. So what it is, it's not a graph database, but it's the tooling layer on top. And it has some quite nice strength. So for example, it allows you to collaborate as a human, like manually, together with all the automation and all the AI agents behind the scenes to collaboratively elaborate your graph and to basically maintain your graph. So I already mentioned that this whole thing has been built as part of the Human Brain Project. It's quite mature already. You see it. It lives there since 2018. And we have basically also now used that tool since we've been associated recently to CSCS to not only keep it in the neuroscience field, but also apply to another one, which will be the second part of my talk. But what is MarmotGraph? If you have a graph, you have different needs. So on one hand, you need to be able to explore the graph. You need to know what is in there. So you need tools for that. You need to enrich it. I talked about it a lot, right? How do I get my metadata in there? We need tools for that. You need to validate what is in there because your colleague, no matter if human or agentic, has contributed something to the graph. You need to check, is that true or not? You need to consume, right? Some people, they don't care about how the graph exists. They just want to get the data and put it into their reports or build a dashboard on top of it or whatnot. So you need tools for that. And obviously, you need to organize yourselves around it, right? If you build huge graphs as the one that we've built for the Human Brain Project and EBRAINS after, you handle a lot of different data sets and you need to organize how people can basically contribute, how you guide them and so on. So you also need tools for that. And last but not least, the most obvious one, you don't want to do everything by hand, you want to automate. So this is the concept. As I told you, there's a graph database. I said before, one schema doesn't fit it all. We still have relational databases in, but that's just a technical detail. But what is more important is we do have this core service that also offers all the APIs and SDKs on top of the APIs. But we also have these tools on top. So there is a search user interface which allows you to search as a user just like that. I actually do a fast forward because I want to make you familiar with the graph first. I want you to say hi to the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph. Despite the huge screen, you can't see it, right? It's way too slow, but it should give you a little bit of an idea of the complexity. And yeah, so, and the other thing that it should show is that it's a living organism, right? It moves. It changes, it updates. So that's exactly what a knowledge graph should be. It's not a one-shot thingy that then exists for eternity. The tools that I was talking about, by the way, if you ever are bored on a weekend, on a rainy one, and you want to explore a bit of neuroscientific data, you can go to search.kg.ebrains.eu and download a ton of neuroscientific data and put some analytics on top. But what I wanted to show you here is that you actually have these kind of very, very specific descriptions, but in a human readable way, right? So this is a user interface for humans. Interoperability, I was saying, so some friends of the project, some colleagues, have built something really cool. That one is as well open for you to explore. It's called a 3D Atlas Viewer of the Brain. So if you want to zoom through the brain and how it's looking like, you can do so, and you can pick different areas. And guess what? That information that is shown here as detail, well, where does that come from? What do you think? The EBRAINS Knowledge Graph. So it's the central information engine allowing various tools to interconnect and therefore to have a unified, validated data source. Other things are, how do I get my metadata in? So you basically have editing tools. By the way, the UIs are currently just improved. So if you don't like the UI, you should have a look at it in a few weeks. But what I wanted to show you here is that do you have these kind of divide and conquer approach again, right? If I'm a neuroscientist, I only care about registering my data set. So I'm going to the dataset entry point and I'm just editing it as it would be just yet another form field. The other ones do the same. One example is the software people, right? They're software developers for neuroscientific software. So they're registering their tool. They say, my tool can interpret data format ABC. The neuroscientist creating the data says, my data is in format ABC, and hooray, by magic, you get basically this connection between software that you can use to analyze the tool without them knowing of each other. And last but not least, we do have the consumption part, right? So many of you might know graph query languages such as BarQL or any others. It's like Gremlin or so on. But again, we're talking about users that might not necessarily be willing to learn complicated languages. So what we're doing is we're basically building this kind of query builder, as we call it, to allow you again to reduce the effort for actually accessing the data. So you click together basically what you want. Here we have an example of we want a data set with its authors. You click it on the UI together, and at the very end you get the JSON that you can process with your scripts or whatever. So the access to get the information is quite easy. Now, my talk was about neuroscience and supercomputing. As I told you already, I'm currently working for the Swiss Supercomputing Center, and I was wondering, like, how can we link these two things? Well, when I joined, I met a scenario where we have a high-performance computing center. That's what HPC stands for, by the way, which are currently undergoing a very profound transformation. So the classic HPC center with high-end simulations running through in one go, they're basically now enriched with AI, with ML workloads which are way more interactive, which have completely different demands. We also have way more heterogeneous hard and software. Some of you might have heard the talk of Nina, so those of you are definitively convinced that we have plenty of cool but complicated things. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge, right? How do we organize ourselves around this? Those hardware elements and the other ones are dynamically allocated, so everything is in a constant flow. Now, okay, how do we get a holistic overview of the sender? Obviously, our specialized teams have the tools they need for doing the day-to-day operations, right? You have OpenDCIM for inventory management, you have Netbox for the networking, you have Red Hat Satellite, you have all these kind of things, but getting like a clear overview of everything you have and how things are interconnected, this is something that we are currently still lacking or were lacking. So the other thing is that those tools obviously are the master of some of the information, but not of all of it. Nevertheless, right, a tool talking about, let's say, infrastructure, they need to keep some kind of information about persons because they have responsible persons for a specific part of the hardware. So they must be kept in sync, and they must be kept in sync also for data that actually is not their core part. And then last but not least, you also have, again, varying levels of abstraction and different granularities, right? Some tools take care of the overall architecture. Some of them go to the very detail, to the very CPU, to the GPU, whatever you think. So, and then even more difficult, different update intervals of data. So you have some kind of eventual consistency if you want to merge these kind of things together. And then there's the brain again, the human aspect of it, right? So you have the technical aspects, you have the information about your different assets sitting there, but you also have a lot of implicit knowledge in the brains of your staff, right? And stuff that might, in the best case, be encoded somewhere in a Confluence page, but in the worst case, documented 20 times in the Confluence page with slightly different variations, and that's up to you to figure out which one is the right one right now. So this needs to be covered somehow. And as I just tried to explain, so this kind of information is specifically affected by duplication, out of sync, and out of date challenges that I was mentioning before. So what we're trying to do is to say, well, to handle all of this, we need to extract the information of the multiple tools that we have and also of the employees, right? We're giving them a tool to emphasize or to encode their knowledge. So what we said is we create a meta layer based, which is try to grasp the center-wide tool unspecific metadata structure, in that sense, a semantic digital twin. So tool unspecific is important, right? Because I don't want to change things if I replace the tool that I'm working with. So if I don't use Netbox but something else, I don't want to change my whole model. And we try to truly abstract it in this sense. And the other thing that we want to achieve, obviously, is to make contradicting information coming from different systems transparent. And then, as I mentioned as well, like this multi-levelness, I want to be able to enrich the information of a specific entity on multiple levels. I want to say, yeah, this CPU exists, but other systems might then give us information about, okay, what is the power consumption, what is the whatnot. So you want to basically be able to extend the information that you're collecting on such a resource. So this sounds very familiar, doesn't it, right? So the case of EBRAINS and the case of the supercomputer sender, they share the challenges. They share the multi-level annotation thing, they share the big heterogeneity, and they also share this complex interlinking of resources. So what we've tried to do was to make the Swiss Supercomputing Center fair. First things to do, take the technology and make it basically useful for other use cases. So separating the technology from the service, so the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph is just a service, but the underlying technology has been extracted, and that's now a quiz question. Who knows what the technology name is? It's MarmotGraph, right? MarmotGraph is the product name that powers now the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph as well as the CSCS Knowledge Graph, and therefore is basically a generic tool. Now, if you just start with an empty graph, you have all the options open, but the problem is you don't know where to start. So when you design a graph as we wanted to do, you need to build some kind of model, some kind of structure, right? And when we were doing this for EBRAINS and the Human Brain Project, we were building a model called Open Minds. So this is basically a definition. You can think of it like a JSON schema advanced with linked data extensions. And one thing that worked out very well was to truly try to start early on simple and then increase it over time and always revalidate with the real world. So basically like having the thing evolving in production. And that's what we did for this supercomputing center as well. So this is the overall model. It looks ugly with the resolution. I didn't expect that huge resolution for the screen. Sorry for that. Again, I don't expect you to read that. There's a little zoom in. You might notice a few of the nodes, but in theory, it's all just to say, well, there are these complex interconnections. And one thing that I wanted to point out is the colors, right? I was talking about this divide and conquer approach, and those colors reflect that in the sense that there are people that are responsible for the device element, right, the hardware, and then there's also the more abstract view on a device with the compute node, which could not necessarily needs to be hardware, right? There's also virtual compute nodes existing. You have the yellow stuff with IP that is easy to read, so that's obviously the networking part, and therefore you basically split up your overarching organizational model into the different domains. Now, why the hell are we doing it? What is it good for, right? There's a lot of effort of doing such a model, so you need to get something out of it. There's several use cases that we've identified. So let's imagine this cabinet there is corrupted, or there's smoke getting out of it physically, right? The cabinet it has not passed the smoke test, let's say. So you want to know who you need to inform. Well, what do you need to do for getting the information on like which services are affected? What are the customers you need to inform? What are the people that you need to ask to come to the server room and fix this? So you're traversing quite some different domains already, right? From the facility part, you go to the hardware part where you see the chassis, you see the physical machines, you might see the V cluster. For those, again, that have visited the NINA talk, you know what a V cluster is. It's a versatile cluster, like a dynamic one. And then basically you also know like by whom it's managed, by whom it's used, etc., etc. So you would, without the knowledge graph, you would need to gather that information in different places. For the knowledge graph, it means one single query and you have the information ready and you can even automate on top of it. Mitigating deployment risks, right? I don't know if any of you ever had a link to Bitnami images at some point, right? Until they decided to, lock it down. So now the center says, well, either we're crossing fingers and when the thing deploys the next time, it will just fail, or we're going to have a look at the overall center where the hell we have Bitnami links or the Bitnami images defined. And if we do, we want to also again trigger those persons to please update their manifests. So here again, we check, okay, what are the container images version that are pointing to Bitnami? We walk the graph the reverse way towards all the installations that we have, to the clusters, to the persons that are responsible for the clusters, and there we find the information and we can basically keep track of who has updated their manifests and who didn't. We have plenty of other of those different use cases. We do have a paper if you're really interested into what it can be good for. It's soon to be released, but if you want an early preview, I'm happy to give it to you. But so just so you know, right, there's the important message here is truly that it's not just yet another observability tool. It's not just yet another monitoring tool. On the opposite, right, it tries to enhance these things. It's trying to basically give more broader context, adding organizational aspects, having, as I mentioned before, a proper semantical twin, taking into account all the different bits and pieces. So you might ask, well, is that only for supercomputer centers, HPCs, or even only for CSCS? And our answer to that is definitely not. So graphs in general, and MarmotGraph in special, obviously, they can help to organize, integrate, and consolidate information of basically any kind, right? The problem is if you do any kind, you just need to come up with a model as the one that we've done. By the way, we have a tool for that as well. But right, you need basically to have these tools enabled so that you get data in, right? Because only if you have a model, that doesn't help. You need to get the data in and you need to get the data maintained. And that's the really tricky part of it. Well, you could say, why the hell should I even care about knowledge graphs? Because there's AI, right? I let it run through my Confluence. I let it run through any data that I have, and it will obviously just spit out everything, all the information I need. I can ask it through the conversational interface what I need to know about my center. But I think there again, right, you need, if you want to have like these challenges addressed, outdated information, unclear information, contradicting information, you need to do your homework. You need to clean up your data yourself with the help of AI, obviously, to make it really useful. And I think there again, the graph is a wonderful tool. It's like a common language between different actors, right? So humans with the right tooling can basically design graphs. Agents can design graphs or contribute to graphs. Any rule-based system can add to graphs. And with that one, you have this necessary common language to basically be able to validate what is in there and to gather more knowledge out of it by inference mechanisms that you can apply on top. And obviously you can feed it back, right? I mean, we've heard a lot of MCP and graph racks is another way of doing it. So you can feed that validated information back into the AI world if you really, really want to talk to the chatbot to get the information needed. So, right. I think the last point is an important one as well. So a knowledge graph or a graph in general is not just meant to slightly differently show your Excel sheet or to enrich it like with a little bit of more information. I think it's truly a living thing that should be maintained. And then it creates a lot of power. So there's a lot of new stuff going on. We are continuously evolving the thing. But another interesting aspect is to federate these graphs. Right? So I was telling you about the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph and the CSCS Knowledge Graph. Now think about the data scientist who executes some scripts on our Alps supercomputing center. If you have the possibility to link the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph together with the CSCS Knowledge Graph, you can create a provenance track, understand what has happened to the data with an unprecedented detail. And that's, again, like increasing the usefulness of all of it. Sensitive metadata is a big, big deal, right? Sometimes we're talking about health data and so on. So we need to basically make sure that this one is properly handled so that we're not only able to describe sensitive data, but that we also are able to handle sensitive metadata itself. And obviously, maybe you have use cases as well, which I would be happy to hear about afterwards. Thank you very much. I've seen in the schedule there is indeed a beer, so I would suggest by asking us for a beer. If you have any questions, otherwise, yeah, I'm happy to answer any of those very burning questions right now, if there's still time. More or less, okay, not really.
So let's.